join On the Other Hand today for this.
Many, many times I've said the enemy of the republic is not the other political party. The enemy of the republic is bad ideas. The reason why we have debate and discussion is to flesh out bad ideas and promote good ideas. And when anything that stifles that discussion is an enemy to the republic.
This is On the Other Hand. A podcast that features community leaders in Arkansas sharing their views and experiences on how to make Arkansas better. Hello and welcome to On the Other Hand. I'm your host, April Chatham Carpenter. Today, I'm here with my co-host, Glenn White. And on our podcast, Glenn and I interview community leaders in Arkansas who are working towards solutions across various political or other divides, or who in some ways are trying to make things better for Arkansans. And I'm very excited about who we have on our show today. So Glenn, tell us who we have.
Well, I will, April. Thanks. We're really happy today to be talking to someone who actually participates in actively making laws in Arkansas, State Representative Carlton Wing. Carlton is a Republican member of the Arkansas House of Representatives. He's from the 70th District, which includes North Little Rock and Sherwood. My understanding is that he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Broadcast Communications from Brigham Young University and a Master of Business Administration from Harding. He began his career as a producer and sideline reporter for the Blue and White Sports Network, and he's worked in sports and media in the states of Utah and Washington, and of course, Arkansas. He was even host several years for a worldwide fishing tournament, which I find interesting, and is a member of the, of course, House of Representatives, has been since 2016, and was the chair of the Agriculture and Parks and Tourism Subcommittee, I believe, during the most recent session. He can tell us more about that. But at any rate, that's a little bit about Carlton. Welcome to On the Other Hand, Carlton.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Good. Well, listen, now you heard kind of what I said about your biography. Fill us in. Are there any other parts? I think you have a leadership role in this past session. What else do you want to fill in terms of your biography for us?
Well, I do serve as the Speaker Pro Tem for the House of Representatives here in this assembly, and that's an honor to be able to serve my colleagues in that capacity. Yes, I was a sportscaster for many years. That's what brought me back to Arkansas. I grew up here in North Little Rock, and I was able to come back and served as the sports director at KARK from 1998 to 2001. And that was a lot of fun. Got to cover my beloved Razorbacks. In fact, my first year was Houston Nutt's first year. And if you remember 1998 Razorback football, that was a good time. It's a good time to be here. But then I got the opportunity of a lifetime in 2001 was to cover professional fishing with the FLW Tour. We created a show called FLW Outdoors that was a national program. And that was what really kind of broadened my world into the outdoors, because I have been producing fishing shows since 2001. So for 24 years, that's been my career. And a lot of people think that's just how I grew up. But no, I'm an adult convert. And that's why I'm so passionate about people getting outside and appreciating Arkansas's outdoors, because anybody can do it. You can get started and you can truly appreciate what we have here in Arkansas in abundance. And so that's a big passion of mine.
Very good. So you mentioned about being Speaker Pro Tem. Most of us won't know what that means. Can you tell us a little bit about what that involves? What do you do?
Probably the easiest definition is like vice president of the House. So we, as the members of the House of Representatives, we elect the Speaker of the House, and the Speaker is our leader. When you see a photo of the House chamber, you've got 99 seats that all kind of sit in kind of a semicircle around the microphone where whoever's presenting the bills, and then sitting up top, that's the Speaker of the House. He is the one who directs the traffic and controls the order and the business of the day. And then after he is elected, he selects someone to serve as his Speaker Pro Tem, which is someone who is his right-hand man to directly assist. And in the times when the Speaker has to leave the chair and go do other things, the Speaker Pro Tem typically will go up and run the House chamber. But you're also involved in a lot of the policy and a lot of the workings of the House to help the members make sure that they're getting to do the things that they were elected to do.
And the actual speaker was
Brian Evans, he's out of Cabot.
So, moving on, one of the things we like to do on our podcast here is to explore with people their values, their life experiences, because it's certainly true that we all have different views of how to do things and what makes things better for all of us. And we usually derive those beliefs and those values somewhere growing up or in our early life. So, could you share with our listeners any of the experiences or people or other things in your early life that led to you to develop your present values and even the kind of what led you to doing what you're doing?
Well, it would have to very obviously for me start with my mom and dad. They were both so active in my life. I'm the oldest of 5 children. And what they did to help set the stage for everything that I do now, and I like to say everything that's good that I'm doing now is as a result of them. Any mistake I make, that's on me, because I was raised well. My mom and dad taught me values. They taught me to be active, to be engaged, to have a lifetime of learning. My mother was very active in PTA growing up, and in fact, she was a teacher. We were at North Little Rock Montessori School was my first school. I went there kindergarten, first and second grade. My mom taught there so that she was able to get a little tuition break, and we were able to go and attend that. And then I went into North Little Rock Public Schools. My mom was active all the way through and would always talk to me about what I was learning in school, making sure that I was staying on task. My father was very keen on teaching me leadership principles and making sure I learned from leaders past and present. He was always encouraging me to read books and biographies on leaders, and that stuck with me. Then I was able in 1984 as a junior in high school to work on my first election campaign. I actually worked on 2 campaigns, but the first one I worked on was President Reagan's re-election campaign in 1984. And it was interesting for me. Just this past week, we were going through our attic. Now, we've lived in this house for 26 years, so that's 26 years of saying, oh, we'll just put it in the attic. And so this was a massive project of multiple trips up and down the attic to bring it down. But I found my old Reagan Bush 1984 T-shirt and the sheets that my responsibility on election night was to go to a couple of precincts and report the numbers, call them in. And so that was my first experience in election campaigning. And because of that, I got to be present and up close when Ronald Reagan came to Little Rock to speak at what was then the Excelsior Hotel. What an amazing experience that was for a high school junior. That really set the tone for me on servant leadership and good conservative principles, but also very, very importantly is the communicative ability that President Reagan had in such abundance, just an amazing communicator to be able to get his ideas across, and it really reached across party lines to be able to create a vision for what America could do, and that was impactful for me because as a youth you're so full of idealism but so short on experience. And so you need to be able to have leaders in your life that can give you a vision of what can be. And if those of us who remember 1980, that was a tough year. We were going through all kinds of stuff as a nation, and President Reagan helped create a vision, and that certainly lasted with me for a long time.
You mentioned servant leadership. Can you explain briefly what that's about?
Well, it's an idea that you are serving the people who have elected you. In this case, in politics, you're serving the people who have elected you, and you need to keep that in mind as you're doing your work. Is that this is service? We are here to serve mankind, and this is a very sacred responsibility, and it needs to be treated like that. And so the service part needs to come first.
Thank you for that clarification, Carlton. I was smiling really largely as you were talking about Reagan because I was remembering back my first presidential election that I ever voted on. I was had just graduated, and President Reagan was running in 1980. And that was where I got my excitement. Also, I loved hearing him as a communicator and just listening to him. And was all in. I was so conservative at the time, though, I will say, that I cried when he picked Bush as his vice presidential candidate because I thought Bush wasn't conservative enough. That's a little bit, well, that's another rabbit hole we won't go down. But anyway, so, we usually ask folks where they are politically in terms of the red-blue continuum, but we know you're a Republican representative. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about your own political leanings, how you kind of got to those. I mean, obviously, Reagan was an influence in your life at the national level, but my guess is there were other kinds of things that were impacting you at that point, because Arkansas was not a Republican state, or primarily a Republican state at that point.
What's interesting is you're correct. Arkansas was very, very blue and had been pretty much since 1836 when we started. But we've always been a conservative state. And that has been interesting because when you look at where we are politically and ideologically, a lot of people would think, wow, Arkansas is a very, very deep red state. You look at the legislative numbers, you have 100 members in the House of Representatives, 81 Republicans, 19 Democrats. That's a super duper majority. And the same percentage threshold is also in the Senate. We have all 7 constitutional offices. And so a lot of people would think, oh, wow, that's a very, very deep red state. I actually don't think politically our state has changed that much. And what we have is, if you have 1/3 of the state has always been deep blue and 1/3 has always been deep red, that middle group has been what has determined our fate. And so we have had, since 1836, that middle group always voted Democrat. And so therefore, we were a very, very Democrat state with overwhelming numbers in the legislature for decades and decades. That middle group, when the national party took a hard left turn, a lot of that middle group realized, I think we more identify with the Republicans now. That's, to me, is a very important assessment because that helps explain where we are. I don't think most of those people in the middle all of a sudden started reading biographies on Reagan, listening to Ben Shapiro, reading Thomas Sowell. I think they just realized we're a little bit more conservative than the party that we had been a part of. But the Southern Democrat was always a conservative group. The main differences, I would say, between the traditional Southern Democrat and the Southern Republican was just how wide you cast the social safety net. But we pretty much agreed on most other major national issues. But the parties have grown apart nationally, and that's forced some people to kind of pick sides. And so therefore, Arkansas has a different makeup when you look at just the binary red or blue, But when you realize where we are in that middle group, that helps kind of more closely identify the unique fingerprint that Arkansas has.
That's an interesting perspective that I haven't heard people talk about in terms of that. We've had people talk about, on our podcast in terms of, how did we switch from Democrat to Republican, but not really thinking about that middle ground. So how were you raised? Were you raised as a kind of a middle ground person?
Both my parents were conservative by nature. The whole world was Democrat back then. I think probably when both of my parents registered to vote, they probably registered as Democrats. But they voted for Reagan both times and kept on going. And now obviously very conservative Republicans. But I was raised to always be learning, which if you're going to learn, you're going to have to listen. Listening is the key part of learning. Is listen more than you speak. And so they always taught me to do that. And in our home, they practiced that.
Okay. Well, you talked about being a junior in high school and then, helping with the campaign for Reagan. But that doesn't necessarily explain why you decided to go into politics, because you were doing really well as a sports person and this fishing network thing as an adult convert. Sometimes I don't see how these two things connect. So can you tell us about the journey there?
Yeah, I've always been interested in politics, and even when I was in elementary school, I was just fascinated by election night, and I think that's where sports and politics kind of blended because in an elementary school's mind, it was like a game. It was winners and losers, and so I just would love to see what happened on election night. I didn't understand all of the things that were taking place and the very important ramifications of outcomes of elections, but to me, it was just kind of fascinating to see people standing up to run, giving speeches, presenting thoughts, and then having that be reflected on election night with a victory or not. When I was in the sixth grade at Indian Hills Elementary School in North Little Rock, I was conducting polls of my classmates as to who they thought was going to win the elections, and my teachers thought that was kind of fascinating. And so I was doing polling very early, and but as my career went on, I got very busy. I have four children. My wife and I have four children, and our own business as well. And I just thought I just don't have the time to run for office. But about 2 years before I ended up running for office, I started getting this inkling that I wonder if it's time for me. My children were getting a little bit older, and but even still, it's just that is such a commitment to put your name on a ballot and run for office and all of the hours and hours that you have to put into campaigning. And then, frankly, to be honest, to deal with the negative, ugly side of politics. Most people don't want to do that, and there's a reason why. And so I just thought, well, maybe it's not time for me. And so I just kept on going. And then 2 years later, a friend of mine who's in the House reached out to me and called and said, hey, if you're interested in running for office, the person who has your seat is leaving. It would be an open seat, and this would be a good time to run if you wanted to do so. And my wife and I put a lot of prayer into the next few days, and then we decided the Lord was guiding us here, and this is our time. And so we ran in 2016, which was a very interesting year to launch a campaign, and we fortunately were victorious and have been since.
And it's every 2 years, right, that you have to run?
Yes, every 2 years. Yep.
Is there a term limit for your seat?
Yes, and that term has gone up and down over the years in Arkansas. It used to be 6 years was our term limits in the House, and then that changed a little bit before I got elected in 2014. We had some changes to the laws, and then it went to 16 years. And so I was elected in the 16-year thing. Now it's trimmed back down to 12 years, but I'm grandfathered into the old rule, so I could go 16 years if I wanted to.
If you wanted to. Okay. So what are some of the highlights, just that you're most proud of in terms of your work that you've done in the legislature?
Well, there are certainly bills and policies that I've worked on and championed, but and pride is, it's a dangerous word. I'll say what I'm grateful for. What I'm grateful for is if I have been able to lower the temperature in the legislature and also in so doing our communities of Arkansas, I have tried to build bridges and I've tried to reach out. And one of the things I'm most grateful for is I think just about every one of my Democrat colleagues and I would say that we're friends and that we agree that each other wants what's best for Arkansas. And I think that we need to see the humanity in each other. We need to see that people who have a different viewpoint than ours, they're not the enemy. Many times I've said the enemy of the Republic is not the other political party. The enemy of the Republic is bad ideas. The reason why we have debate and discussion is to flesh out bad ideas and promote good ideas. And when anything that stifles that discussion is an enemy to the Republic. And so it's not the Democrats that are the enemy. And if you're a Democrat, it's not the Republicans that are your enemy. The enemy is bad ideas. And so let's get to a point in our discussion when we can actively discuss with each other matters of importance. That's the thing I'm most grateful for, is that we in the legislature, we are friends. We respect each other. And it's not what people think. And if I may, let me share a quick story.
Yeah.
When I first got elected, we pick our seats in the House based on seniority. And so we come in and for our freshman class, you have to draw for the number because we all were elected on the same time. There's about 20 of us that were elected in 2016. I drew number 98. There were 3 seats left to choose from, and I chose a seat next to somebody, and I thought, well, because I'd just gotten out of a very, it was a partisan campaign. It's my district is very, very purple, and so and I thought, well, I guess the Democrats are just going to beat me up all session long, and so I chose to sit next to a Democrat. And if you looked at it on paper, this person, I am a white Republican from the city, and I was sitting next to a black Democrat from the country. And I thought, well, this is going to be my fate. He's just going to and he was a very experienced member as well. So I said, oh, he's just going to rip on me all day, every day. I did not realize when I introduced myself to him and shook his hand that I had met one of my new best friends. And David Fielding out of Magnolia is just a wonderful friend. He mentored me. He was so kind to me, and he set the first tone for me that we are all on the same team. We are a 100-member team that is out to provide and promote the best ideas for Arkansas. And I think that if more people could understand that that's actually what takes place in the Capitol, that it's not this constant battle and bickering, that we have respect for each other, I think that would help filter down to society, and we could do less of that in our society.
Boy, that gives me hope. Thank you for this sharing behind the scenes. I love hearing that. Well, I want to ask a question that kind of relates back to your emphasis or interest in tourism and Arkansas outdoors and kind of what brought you back to Arkansas with the natural resources and public lands, and wondering what kind of key issues that you see that might be coming up before the legislature, maybe in the future, but what could be recently as well, that you see as important in that area, that tourism and outdoors area.
Tourism is a huge industry to the state. Just last year, we had 50 million visitors come to Arkansas. They spent $10 billion. This is a massive opportunity for Arkansas. And this is very timely for that question because just a couple of days ago, Governor Sanders announced a new initiative blending two top priorities of her administration and the legislature, which is education and outdoors recreation. And so we are going to have curriculum in the classrooms designed to get our children a front row seat to all that Arkansas has to offer in terms of the outdoors, which includes outdoors recreation and business opportunities, but it also includes the mental health that comes from getting outside and experiencing nature. Richard Louv wrote a book called Last Child in the Woods, and has started, I think he's written 2 or 3 books since then on that same topic, what he calls nature deficit disorder. And what happens when you get outside? One of the things I love about being outside so much is there are no right angles. There are very few straight lines. It is so random out there. Trees in all different kinds of directions, all kinds of animals and paths. They're not straight. They're not paved. And you get outside, and there's something about that cleanses the mind. And so I think there's so much opportunity Arkansas has. One of the things I love to say is that Arkansas is the only state in the union that has both a gator season and an elk season. And if you think about the habitat that an elk has to survive in and the habitat a gator has to survive in, you realize Arkansas does have a lot. The only thing we don't have is salt water. And but even then, I want you to know it's theoretically possible to catch a shark in Arkansas because sharks can go hundreds of miles up fresh water should they so choose. So think about that next time you swim in the Mississippi River.
Whenever that's going to be.
Yes.
I really appreciate what you said about the what's the name of the author? Richard Louv?
Richard Louv, L-O-U-V, L-O-U-V. O-U-V,
because I'm a retired psychologist, and I've been active and enjoying the outdoors for decades. And so I became aware some time ago of the increasing amount of research that shows the value in terms of mental health as well as physical health of exposure in the outdoors. Even just living near green spaces makes a big difference for people. So I'm happy that you brought that up and totally agree with people looking more into that. Let's look at some other things related to your work in the legislature. There have been a lot of laws passed, obviously, and there are differences of opinion on which ones are good and which ones aren't and why. I wonder if you have any thoughts about laws that have not yet been passed that you'd like to see passed, that, ones that might be helpful for our state and our citizens.
One of the things that's facing us as a state is the proper application of taxation policy. And I think as we march towards a stated goal of 0% income tax, we have to look at what that means and how we get there. I happen to serve as the national chair of the state and local taxation task force that's part of the NCSL, which is the National Conference of State Legislatures. And so I've served on that committee for about 6 years. And so it's a group of legislators from across the country, bipartisan, Democrats and Republicans in this committee talking about taxation policy. And we approach it from a factual basis. What's good, what's bad, recognizing that we live in 50 laboratories of democracy. Each state does things just a little bit differently. So there's no cookie cutter that's going to work everywhere. But Governor Sanders has stated that her goal is 0% income tax. And that's a goal I've supported for years, even before Governor Sanders got here. I had conversations with Governor Hutchinson about this, could we get to zero? The trimming the fat part is easy. We can trim the excess in government, and that's the kind of the low-hanging fruit. And we've been able to do that. Since I got elected, we started off with a top rate of 7.0%. We're now down to 3.9% for our state income taxes. So we've almost cut income taxes in half. That's a good thing, but those were the easier cuts. We've also been able to see revenues rise as we've done so, which has been helpful. We have a state reserve now in the multiple billions of dollars to be able to help us should there be another economic disaster, kind of like what happened with COVID. And this time the government doesn't print trillions of dollars to bail everybody out. We might have to stand on our own. Arkansas is in a great shape to be able to do that because we've built up our reserves during this time of prosperity. But we're going to have to address what a 0% looks like and how the revenue streams are going to be adjusted. Because you can't just pass a 2-sentence bill that says, wherefore hitherto Arkansas has no state income tax. There are essential functions of government that have to be funded, and how that gets funded is going to be a discussion that absolutely has to take place. So those are some future pieces of legislation that I see us having to deal with. Mississippi, a few years ago, announced they were going to go to 0%. Then they backed off when they saw what a Herculean task it was going to be, and they took some time to kind of structure that discussion, and now they're back on track. They just, I believe just last year, they announced it is our goal to march towards 0%. Arkansas has 2 border states that have 0% income tax, Tennessee and Texas. And if Mississippi were to do the same, we need to look at that. We need to look at it seriously, and we also need to look at it quickly, is what can we do to remain competitive in the Mid-South here, because that is essential for Arkansas's continued growth.
One of the things that's struck me for some time is that there's been so much emphasis in recent years on reducing or eliminating taxes, but I haven't heard so much about exactly what you're talking about. So how do you fund the things that we do need to do, and as a society we decide is important enough to fund? And there are 2 ways to get there. One is to have greater income, which with government means taxes, or reduced expenditure. And if you have a certain amount of expenditure you decide as a society is desirable, the money's got to come from somewhere. And I have not heard that discussed, so it's really encouraging to hear that people from both parties are having a national discussion about that, and I'd love to see where that goes.
And let me add is that there's a third thing too, is that as you decrease the taxation burden, you increase participation in the economy, which actually increases revenues to the government without raising taxes. That was one of the benefits of the Reagan economy, was he was able to take supply side economics and bring that burden down, which helped more people participate, and then they start paying their share of the taxes. And so many hands make light work kind of a thing. That's how that worked. And Art Laffer was the economist that helped kind of orchestrate that for Reagan. But a lot of people don't know that the seeds of that philosophy was planted during the Kennedy administration, that he had started that. And then the subsequent presidents between Kennedy and Reagan backed away from that. But it was Kennedy who actually laid the foundation and the framework for that Art Laffer was able to pick up on. And that was what helped Reagan again. We keep coming back to that. But during that time of economic malaise, as we were in, bringing that tax burden down actually increased revenues for the government.
Don't want to get too much into the weeds on this, but I remember back then, and I know there's been a long difference of opinion between parties on the impact of supply side economics, with the notion that, as I understood it, Reagan and Laffer, the whole notion was if you reduce the tax burden on the well-off, they will spend it on investment that gives other people jobs and they'll join the economy. That was the general idea as I understand it and as I heard explained many times. And yet that hasn't always seemed to be the case when we've seen it in practice. Can you help us explore a little more how that might be a defensible approach?
Yeah, well, so Art Laffer had what's called the Laffer curve. Right. And for folks who aren't familiar with Art Laffer, it's Laffer, not like humorous. But right. The Laffer curve talked about how to keep things, it wasn't like a drastic cut, and you have to watch expenses as you do it. But as you go through, you can trim and trim and trim. And as you do that, if you don't get too drastic with it, it can maintain itself as a revenue source. And that's what's happened here in the state of Arkansas. We went from 7.0, we went to 5.9, 5.5, 5.1. We kept trimming just a little bit. And each time there was concern, oh no, we're going to be cutting revenue, and that's revenue we need for the programs. Every time we did it, every single time we did it in the state of Arkansas, revenues went up.
I'm curious, given what you've told us some positive things about the bipartisan, good feelings in the legislature. Encouraging to hear. First heard that from Andrew. It's a real eye opener to hear that. You've been serving now for almost 10 years in the legislature. How have you seen our government in Arkansas evolving, and where do you think it's headed in the future?
Certainly the government has evolved. It has reflected the will of the people. And over the last, probably from 2010, 2012 was when we started to see that shift that we talked about a little bit earlier in the podcast, where you had the third and that middle group. And that's when the state started to become a Republican state. Again, I don't know that the ideology has changed that much, but that one barrier that we use, since we're such a binary politics, with the Republicans and Democrats, that one wall moved over, but it has reflected that. And so we have, like I say, all 7 constitutional officers are Republican. The vast supermajority in the House and the Senate are Republican. But that doesn't mean that everybody agrees. And so there are, whoever the majority party is, and the Democrats have said the same thing, that when they were in charge, that group is going to have different ideas on how to do things because it's so large. And that just reflects the diversity of opinion that human beings have. We, in politics, make everything red or blue, but there are shades of red and shades of blue across the spectrum. And so our state reflects that.
Well, that's it for the first part of April and Glen's conversation with Representative Carlton Wing. We'll continue this conversation in the next episode, so be sure to check out part 2. And remember that we offer dozens of other interviews like this, and you can find that at our podcast page at arkansas.braverangels.org.
Well, thanks for joining us on today's edition of On the Other Hand. This was the first part of our conversation with Representative Carlton Wing. On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
From your host, April Chatham Carpenter
and Glenn White,
Join us in working to make our relationships and communities better.